The question of which show is actually better between Breaking Bad and Sopranos is a subject of much debate among fans and critics alike. Both shows have their own unique strengths and have left a significant mark on television history. Breaking Bad is often praised for its intense storytelling and character development, while The Sopranos is hailed for its complex characters and psychological depth. Ultimately, the answer to which show is better is subjective and depends on individual preferences. But I kinda just want to go over each show's strengths and weaknesses, and give my thoughts as to what show is better in my opinion, which I'll say at the ending of this video, and I won't shy away from it. Now I've done videos like this in the past, however not going to score it, just kinda go over genuinely the strengths and weaknesses of the show and try and make comparisons. Now I believe that Tony Soprano is a superior protagonist to Walter. I firmly believe that whilst Walter is incredibly well written, 3D character with groundbreaking performance from Cranston, I do believe the writers of The Sopranos take bigger risks with Tony. From his racism, his adultery, which whilst Walter does do, the amount of times Tony does it is almost comedic. His brutality of the violence he commits.
Ow! What are you screaming about? Free alterations? Oh! Mr. Spot!
All help make him a very morally grey character, which also helps this and gives it the edge over Walter, is the therapy and dream sequences, in which we basically get Tony's any thoughts said to us, like his manipulation of Melfi and his hypocrisy, and the fact he feels like a victim.
Here you go. Of course, this is what it's all about, right? Motherfucking cock-sucking money. Here.
It'll show it as paid on your next month's bill.
Fine. Stick it up your ass.
And the dream sequences are all very well done and vital to the plot, as they subtly tell the audience Tony's actual thoughts and feelings behind the mob boss exterior, even more so than when he's with Dr. Melfi, as it's his subconscious thoughts and shows the audience the reason Tony is the way he is, especially the episode featuring Kevin Finnery, which I think is a very good what if on Tony's life and how much of a better life he could have had, but at last he won't due to his choices. And I think Tony's relationship with his mother is also a very key aspect which edges Walter, as it really shows how screwed up Tony was as an individual due to childhood trauma and his ultra nihilistic mother, who unfortunately couldn't come to a crescendo due to the untimely death of Nancy Marchand. Despite that, Walter is still a great character, however I've already went into depth on him in my video on Breaking Bad vs Better Call Saul, so please check it out. However, I believe Breaking Bad has a much more superior villains. From Tuco Salamanca, who's a great introduction into the madness of the world Walter is about to enter and how deprived and savage it can be, whilst Gustavo Fring is a great character to parallel Walter's journey, and shows how Walter, even if morally wrong, could have operated whilst being much less traceable. Even in the first interaction is just perfect, and perfectly sets up their similarities and differences between the two characters.
I don't think we're alike at all, Mr. White. You are not a cautious man at all. Your partner was late, and he was high. Yes.
And even a character like Todd is a great person to kind of tell us, the audience, how far Walter has come, as he's willing to work with a literal child murderer and his neo-Nazi uncle, also allowing Jesse, who has constantly followed his orders, setting him out to be a meth slave. Whilst Sopranos villains, whilst memorable, aren't the strongest point of the show in my opinion, and each show's side characters, in my opinion, quite hard to compare. However, I do believe that one show has the upper hand due to one particular reason, which I'll get into later. But both sets are great, most obvious being Christopher and Jesse, who are kind of comparable, as both start out the series as quite naive, risk-taking characters. Christopher with his drug selling to Meadow, and Jesse with him being very obviously a drug dealer, who's exploited by other higher-ups. Both of course go through drug issues and rehab, and literally due to someone's death, Jane's death, Jesse, Christopher literally smothering his dog to death, and of course both have quite controlling manipulative father figures in both Tony and Walter. And I'm kind of stuck on who the better character is out of the both. Both are just well written, highly tragic characters, and there isn't much in my opinion between them, in terms of writing quality and acting, as Aaron Paul gives the much more bombastic, in your face, in a good way type of acting, whilst Michael Imperioli gives a much more subtle performance. And the other side characters in both series are great. Take for example, Saul Goodman gives a very great comedic performance with a subtle feeling that there's something else happening there, whilst a character like Junior shows the downward spiral and kind of the end of the original, quote, old days. To Polly, Tony's kind of right-hand man besides Silvio, and whilst a comedic character in his serious moments, is quite well written, especially his fear of Tony killing him, which is quite well warranted. Now I'm going to say that in my opinion, The Sopranos has the much better side characters due to two things. First off, I do believe some of the characters are made much more better in Better Call Saul, due to them being given context, like Mike and why he liked Jesse so much, and the much more obvious hints towards Gustavo Fring's sexuality that inform his urgency as a character, which, while conveyed in Breaking Bad, is much more subtle than in Better Call Saul. And in my opinion, a much bigger problem is that Breaking Bad's female characters aren't the best written. Now, while not inherently bad, they are written to be either annoying to the audience or aren't given much screen time. This is perhaps due to the show focusing on masculinity, like Walter's heightened sexual desire in order to control and overpower people, like him trying to rape Skylar, which I think results in the hate for a character like Skylar White, who while shouldn't really be hated, but because of our bias towards Walter White, she is hated. Whilst Sopranos features heavily, very well written, established, even iconic female characters, in particular Dr. Melfi, who is shown to be a strong-willed, very capable, smart woman, who even after facing an assault chooses to not get Tony involved. To Carmela, who is quite similar to Skylar in her complicity in sticking with Walt, however she is given much more focus and made more obvious to the audience. She is also a very morally grey character in The Sopranos, and only stays with Tony due to the money and the perks of Tony's mass amount of wealth. And of course Livia Soprano, one of the most horrible, despicable characters ever written on TV, which I've also made a video on. And overall, the Breaking Bad's female characters just aren't that great, which you can clearly see in the prequel / prologue Better Call Saul, with the incredible character of Kim Wexler, who is a great necessary addition to the entire universe. Another weakness in my opinion for Breaking Bad is Season 2, as it feels to me quite disjointed with some fantastic bottle episodes, but the whole plain plotline felt over the top and for Breaking Bad's seemingly grounded nature a bit too extreme. Now, The Sopranos also had some blatant weaknesses. First off, the inclusion of Tony B. Whilst interesting and no doubt in the talent of Steve Buscemi, he feels to me kind of a cartoonish and out of place character. The writers even kind of forced to kill him off due to writing themselves into a corner. They also waste, in my opinion, some very interesting ideas, like the Napoli episode, which should have been quite an important, interesting episode considering the issue of Italian Americans, which is discussed throughout the entire show. However, it feels like they just wasted an opportunity, and thus make a lot of episodes feel like filler. For example, an episode like A Hit is a Hit, to Christopher, to Camelot, all just feel like boring, terrible episodes that you can skip. And both shows, of course, have their extreme positives. Of course, Sopranos literally possibly the most important show of all time, and changed TV for the better with its inclusion of Tony as an anti-hero, as it also introduced a cinematic element into TV, moreover into the mainstream of TV, and gave TV a much more edgier, darker feel, whilst Breaking Bad kind of perfected the downfall of a hero, and features some of the greatest villains' performances in TV history, alongside Ozymandias, which is possibly the greatest payoff episode ever created. Both shows' impacts are still felt today in TV, and even just in pop culture in general, and for good reason as well. Now, I'd like to talk about the finale of both these shows, and how they both kind of have issues. Now, that in and of itself is a controversial take, but let me explain. Now, with Breaking Bad's ending, the finale, in my opinion, is quite good. And you know it fit well with the show, and showed Walter finally come to his senses, and in a sense redeem himself. However, it does kind of seems to relieve Walter of all his crimes, as he's never caught by the police. He kills all the, quote, bad guys, and dies before the police get to him. Whilst yes, he went through hardships, and his family hating him, in the end, Walter seems to die as though he had done good for the world. However, this all changed in my opinion with the ending of Better Call Saul, which I think kind of justifies Walter in some way. Now, not obviously the harm that he would cause innocent people with his meth, but all these people such as Tuco, Gus, Hector, Salamanca, even to some extent Saul himself, and thus elevates the show's ending to make it much more satisfying and less fan-servicey. Then there is The Sopranos ending, which I believe is one of the most riskiest endings to a TV show ever, which I do believe mostly works. However, I do think it's slightly dampened by Chase implying there might have been a sequel series had James Gandolfini still been alive, and The Many Saints of Newark just kind of been a bit pointless and in my opinion an unnecessary addition to the series, dampening some of the show's previous mysterious elements. Now, what show do I think is truly better? I believe The Sopranos is a superior show, and it's very close. I just think The Sopranos is slightly the better show. One thing I think it does really well, take for example, is its cinematography. Now obviously Breaking Bad cinematography is stunning and beautiful, however I do believe The Sopranos, in that aspect, takes a much more menacing approach, whether it's in the detail in the background, like Polly shaking Butchie's hand behind Tony's back, to this shot of Tony with 6 fingers, a sign of a bad omen, or the show's finale scene, with its almost ethereal editing. And Breaking Bad cinematography, I think, becomes much more meaningful in Better Call Saul. I think the impact it had is just so noticeable in pop culture and TV history, from Tony Soprano, perhaps TV's greatest character ever, to the ending, which to this day is still talked about, what happened to Tony, and is a rare example of a risky artistic ending working, in my opinion. And this decision, in my opinion, is mine. And it's not to say Breaking Bad is nowhere near Sopranos level, because it almost is. Even some aspects are better villains, and in my opinion the greatest episode in TV history, with Ozymandias. However, I just think The Sopranos, with its seismic shift, what was allowed on TV, is just so important, and in my opinion outweighs Breaking Bad slightly. Just think of my opinion like The Godfather vs Goodfellas, both masterpieces of cinema. However, perhaps due to coming first, or its iconic nature, The Godfather also is slightly better than The Goodfellas. So yeah, that's my overall thoughts. What's the better show out of both of these? If you disagree, that's fine. This is just my opinion. I think both of these shows are must-watch shows for anybody that's a fan of TV drama and TV as an art form.